Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very, very tall leader from the healthcare and pharmaceutical world, Mr. Vikram Paul. Vikram, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh. Thank you for having this conversation with me and look forward to an exciting session.
Thank you. Vikram is the head of the global pharmaceutical and healthcare development of Rhenus Logistics. He's a seasoned healthcare-focused supply chain executive. He has worked in Southeast Asia, Middle East, Africa, and North Asia, besides India, of course. And he has worked with BAX Global and other multinationals for almost 3 decades. So Vikram, today we're going to speak of supply chains. And, supply chains have changed completely in the last 30, 40 years. But as I was looking at your bio and I was thinking of my own career, we used to have a purchase manager who has now evolved or morphed into a chief supply chain officer. How has the function evolved over the decades?
Thank you. So I do see that, the entire journey in the last 30 years has brought one, even as a professional, and I'll say this just as a prelude to making some comments on the responsibilities of the position. But when I first decided to join this industry right out of college in Calcutta from St. Xavier's College, my father, called this industry a cargo agency. Mm. And I worked with a company called Mercury Travels at that time as a young intern. And from there today, we see the very same scope of work, the very same responsibilities that an organization undertakes to have transformed completely into supply chain. Now, from the customer standpoint, we see that there is so much now around demand sensing, demand forecasting, risk assessments as far as transportation, international transportation is concerned, audits, compliance, that the role itself, as we look at many of our counterparts and peers sitting on the customer side, has really transformed itself. Mm-hmm. And all of these features and all of these analytics and all of these intelligence is definitely being used, I would say, to a very high degree in pharma and healthcare, obviously, because of the situation we are in, but across many, many industries today. And as a result of that, we are happy to see that, our colleagues and peers on the customer side today are sitting they have a seat on the table. So they're sitting on the board. They are driving some of these decisions, some of the capabilities and evaluations of 3PL companies like ourselves to a much higher standard today than where it was, even I would say 10 years ago for that.
Correct. Well said. So, again, the changes that are taking place in the supply chain, coupled with what's happening because of the pandemic, the whole supply chain business, from my conversation with a lot of other supply chain leaders, seems to be flipping around on its head. Completely new paradigms are getting created. So my question to you is that what has changed that is requiring companies to make such significant changes?
So it's quite broad. I mean, some of the challenges and changes have been quite broad. And again, let me give you an example. I'm sure this time, a lot of our friends and associates listening to this followed the union budget. Mm-hmm. If I recall, the union budget this time contained, I think, 36 times the mention of supply chain, which I have never seen before. Probably in 30 years of collective experience, we've seen probably 30 times mention of supply chain, and this time in a single budget it was there. There's a couple of things to it. I think one is the sustainability aspect. So today, if you look at the priorities or the focus areas of many global companies today, they are on sustainability, net zero carbon, green supply chains, etc., which is a huge transformation in itself that needs to take place, with many of the companies already putting some near-term targets in terms of their own sustainability goals. So service providers have to similarly, up the ante and up the priority within their own organizations to be able to do this. Unfortunately, at this time, driven also partially by events like the Suez Canal crisis, the port and airport closures, as far as China is concerned, but also recently the Afghanistan, huge humanitarian crisis and the pull of all the resources into that region. Cost is a big issue within the customers' supply chains as well. To give you a sense, today air freight out of a big market like India is probably seeing 4 times what it was pre-pandemic levels.
Wow.
And ocean freight is unfortunately seeing 8 to 10 times what it was pre-pandemic levels for a variety of reasons. Obviously, some of it is just with regards to passenger travel and things of that kind, which has been the backbone of a lot of air transportation. But on the ocean freight side, we see, demand being so high and that bullwhip effect being so severe felt in the supply chain that we see that is an issue as well. And then the third one is visibility and real-time monitoring. So a lot of companies and a lot of customers today, as a matter of being able to mitigate their risks within the supply chain, are offering or are asking for visibility in far more points within their supply chain, which includes the scope of services for companies like ourselves. But literally, pharma and healthcare companies, Ashutosh, are asking for end-to-end real-time monitoring. So we are mirroring this with things like control tower, things like 24/7 supervision, escalation, so on and so forth. Recoveries of various shipments that could be in problems, etc., as a means to be able to respond to that challenge that is there with many of our customers.
Very interesting.
So a combination of 2-3 things, I would say.
Very interesting. And, just before we started recording our conversation, you did mention about vaccines, but I'd love to get your perspective on how supply chains are different for the pharmaceutical world, the vaccine world, the healthcare world. What is unique about this?
Thank you. I think another great question. So if we see today, the entire localization, I would say, of many countries in terms of right from manufacturing to consumption of the vaccines that has taken place. Unfortunately, vaccines is really being produced in a major way in just about 8 countries in the world, actually. And if we see what is happening with regards to that, I think the focus is really changing more from cost and speed to market kind of KPIs within an organization to now also looking at very heavy compliance requirements in the areas of warehousing, in the areas of first mile, last mile deliveries and distribution, in the areas of even audits and compliance towards all of these end-to-end standards that need to be established. And I think that is the main priority for many of the supply chain directors and vice presidents sitting within this pharma and healthcare customer community to be able to turn around and get that also up to a certain standard and up to a certain quality. Because that was almost, at least if I say it from an Indian standpoint, a neglected area of the supply chain. But today, because you are forced to be able to up the standard and also meet the kind of scale and volume of vaccines that is taking place, that's the biggest focus area that we're seeing at this time.
Very interesting. And, the vaccine part, just continuing for one more question, needs a very unique cold chain for carrying it. How are you adjusting to the requirements of cold chains in the regions that you are in?
Yeah, so I think when we looked at our capabilities as a company or our readiness as a company, I would say way back probably in Q4 2020, and we were asked to cater to minus 70 degrees, for example, across the supply chain. We saw it as something which we would like to stay away from. But having said that, there is a number of active and passive packaging solutions that have come into play today that are readily available, that are bolting on to international transportation systems, international custom clearance systems, that are ready to be able to at least maintain a minus 20 degree without any problems at all. So we are working with a much broader ecosystem of players that have established themselves in different parts of the world, I must say, with a lot of speed, but also a lot of quality and a lot of stability as well, that are helping us to be able to do this. For us, vaccines in the sense of COVID-19 vaccines is still a very small percentage of our overall healthcare portfolio of business. But yes, wherever we are challenged with that kind of business, we are able to work with an ecosystem of partners that are really pretty high standard and global companies as well.
Terrific. And now let's move on and talk a little bit about technology. How is technology changing supply chains and warehousing?
So I think the whole idea today in supply chains, Ashutosh, is proactive rather than reactive.
Correct.
And people are saying that if you're looking, in the rearview mirror towards what happens in the supply chain, that's not an acceptable standard or an acceptable response with many global customers. Technology, I think, plays the most important part in that, in the way of right from analytics to root cause evaluations, to be able to provide, escalations towards recoveries and notifications, etc., to be able to give you a sense of how that seamless supply chain is working from a customer standpoint. And, the application of technology today is mainly focused in the area of analytics, in the area of being able to do root cause assessments, and to be able to make that whole supply chain a proactive rather than a reactive situation. To give you one example today, say the pharma healthcare community, and I'm sure you will know this as well from your own, very high level experience in healthcare, is being challenged with a problem which they call, creating excessive inventory just to be able to de-risk the supply chain. The healthcare community is being challenged with the fact of saying that, listen, there is excessive inventory which is being created. And so a lot of these companies are using some of the technology tools that are available now and have come into the market in a very short period of time to be able to really address that problem and eliminate that problem within their organizations as well.
Interesting. And, of course, there's another unique part of the pharmaceutical supply chain. This is the only industry where there's a reverse supply chain.
Correct.
How do you cope with that?
So when we look at a network, or when we look at the ability to be able to do turnaround and round trips, essentially to service any business, it could start from domestic transportation, but it also has its own value today in air freight and ocean freight. There is a lot of leverage that can be created when you're looking at reverse logistics per se as an activity. And we have, as a company, provided reverse logistics for a lot of different industries, which are including pharmaceutical and healthcare as well. If you talk about things like, the accessories to healthcare per se, the PPE kits, the gloves, the gauges, the syringes, the ancillary kind of product around healthcare, that has seen the massive amount of reverse logistics and the massive amount of returns as well that is there in the business. And we have a good, solid product within the organization to be able to cater to that business for not only pharma, but many other industries as well.
Fascinating. I wish I had got to know you when I was founded Guardian. My biggest headache was reverse supply chain. The biggest losses of medicines would happen because nobody was really bothered on what was coming back from the stores and going back to the distributors and to the companies.
And I think to answer that, I don't know whether we would have been up to the challenge when you founded Guardian in 2003. I think this is also new business and new activity for us. But certainly at the moment, we are ready and we handle quite a bit of it.
Fantastic. My next question, and this is something I've been asking a lot of the supply chain leaders, is that with the kind of technology, which is artificial intelligence for predicting stocks, using of drones for supply, and the government of India apparently has cleared drone delivery for vaccines. How are you preparing for these kind of changes?
So I think within technology, say for example today on the warehousing side as well, every WMS that we configure, every WMS that we create for our customers is designed to the specific needs and requirements of those customers. In that today we have things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, a lot of the analytical tools that are there as well. But yes, we are hearing about the expectation around drone deliveries, say, for example, in remote parts of Africa, where we do some amount of the pharma and healthcare business as well. And we are responding to that with a larger system, again, of ecosystem, with a larger ecosystem of providers that partner with us and support us in these areas. To give you an example, we recently started a project with a drone delivery company in Africa, but which was founded in North America today, that is being able to test with us, proof of concept test with us, some of the last mile delivery, drone delivery activity in remote parts of Africa as well. So we've responded in equal measure, I would say, and we are, inherently, Rhenus has worked with a partner ecosystem that is able to support us with some of these kind of bolt-on activities that we need to do as well.
Interesting. Let's now move to the impact the pandemic and COVID-19 has had on supply chains. One is, of course, the problems of doing work because of the pandemic, but the other is the opportunities that have come from working from home. How have supply chains started to respond to two things of working from home? Number one, the expectation of the consumer that everything must be delivered in 30 minutes.
Yes.
And number two, you don't have one large office where you're going to deliver anything to. People are working from home in different localities.
I think again that's a very good question and obviously very relevant today. The essence of this, Ashutosh, is if you look at a organization that is not essentially built around location, but is built around the functionality and deliverables of a particular job.
Mm-hmm.
So to give you an example in that, obviously frontline workers are such an integral part of being able to do the day-to-day business that it is impossible to imagine for long-term, we could have done it in a full lockdown, but it's impossible to imagine that they would be able to work from obviously remote areas, etc. So we immediately mobilized, that workforce with permissions, with licenses, with all of the government liaison which needed to be done to be able to get them to actually do their work in a problem-free manner as much as possible. And that we spent a lot of time in doing that because obviously the suddenness was a problem. But if you look at otherwise work from home today for even activities like, say, for example, business development and sales, customers have actually been able to respond in a wonderful manner to online, kind of environment and online meetings, etc., in a way that essentially relationship-based business. If you look at 3PL and supply chain community, Ashutosh, it's always been a relationship-based business. Yeah. You sit down, you shake hands, you give a hug, you see the person face to face to keep that relationship going. I've got to say that I'm surprised with the way it has transformed into an online, staring at a screen on both sides, and you don't have the ability to be able to connect in that manner. But we've been able to get a lot of our activity, I would say, which has been very dependent on face-to-face to be able to go back into an online. And I think if you look at a future organization where essentially we are not being forced to have people go back to work just for the fact that we need to fill our offices, but it's more about the efficiency of the job you can do if you choose to work remotely or if you even choose to work in a hybrid kind of situation. I think that's the kind of and of course, you have a digitally enabled platform that allows you to conduct a lot of your work from a remote environment. I think that's a very attractive future situation as far as workforce is concerned. Now, I can also tell you that, for example, from an operating cost standpoint, lease rentals and facilities have always consumed roughly between 20 to 25% of operating cost within a 3PL balance sheet.
Okay.
Today, to be able to look at a flexible, an agile way of being able to consume that cost only to some extent of what it was inherently makes it a very exciting future state as well.
Fascinating. So, Vikram, I have time for two more questions, and
Sure.
these two questions are going to be related to the government.
Mhm.
You just mentioned in the last budget 36 times the supply chain was mentioned, and in the same week, someone else told me that in the same week, President Biden, Prime Minister of the UK, and the Indian Prime Minister, all three of them spoke of the supply chain, unrelated.
Yep.
My question to you is basically in two parts. Number one is that I want to understand from you, what is the role the government has to play to support the supply chain from the perspective of the infrastructure? And second, how are the new channels that are being opened up in India, which are things like river transportation, how will they help supply chains?
Yeah, I think, again, you're absolutely right when you say the abundant number of times that supply chain and the expectations around improvements in efficiency of supply chain has been quoted by many world leaders and obviously in our own union budget as well. To answer your first question, I think today regulatory policy and framework is essentially something which in a country like India probably needs to be changed and adjusted and flexed multiple times in a fiscal year to be able to facilitate the kind of changes that are needing to take place as far as the Indian geography is concerned. I was very excited to see that in terms of the vaccine distribution blueprint in India, I actually got the first blueprint of exactly how the vaccine distribution was going to be planned, I think in about November, December timeframe of last year, in a release from Deutsche Bank, I think it was, that basically said, listen, this is the approved, and the process ran exactly in that way.
Amazing.
So I think being able to do this not only for vaccines, which was obviously to deal with the crisis, but to do this across all industries today is the responsibility of the government. Things like GST, responding to the problems and trying to eliminate the bottlenecks that were faced with when GST was applied, given that it was, a very hurried kind of tax reform that took place, not necessarily the best managed, but that's also to do with the size of the country and the kind of reform that was taking place, are also areas where, people need to respond to the challenges and the changes that need to be made in tax reforms as huge as that.
Mhm.
Now, on the second aspect of, things like river waterways and things of that kind that are developing, the mix of trade between rail and road is also changing a lot in favor of rail today because of the great work that the Indian Railways is doing. One of the principal challenges with Make in India or Atmanirbhar Bharat is the fact that India still sits at about 13 to 14% of logistics cost as the overall landed cost, which is very high when you compare us to countries like China, but also a lot of countries like in Southeast Asia or even in the larger Indian subcontinent region, where costs are not that high. One of the things that is really something the government should think about is to create a marketplace today. As far as rail versus road versus riverways and waterways is concerned, just to be able to give that visibility and that transparency to roughly about 50% of that logistics cost.
Okay.
That is taking place, within that 14% cost, about 7% or 5% is being consumed only on the inland side of the transportation. And if today a marketplace is created with all the kind of PPP stakeholders that need to be involved in creating that marketplace, just as a matter of being able to address that customer requirement of speed versus cost, I think that would be another great step towards lowering the cost, using multimodal in the most effective way as possible, and at the end of the day, allowing Make in India or Atmanirbhar Bharat to really become a globally competitive program that it needs to be. If we don't move the needle on that 5, 6, 7%, the balance of the 50% that is sitting can do whatever it is doing. In any case, it's already in chaos, but it can do whatever it is doing. We will still not be able to bring it down to, say, the 7, 8, 9% that needs to happen to make Indian logistics competitive.
Amazing. Vikram, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for taking me through such amazing complexities of supply chain and making it sound so simple and easy. Thank you again and good luck.
Really, interacting with somebody like you, Ashutosh, has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and all the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.